All right. Next installment of Mr. Messner's Math in the Real World Speaker Series. I have with me a friend from way back in the day. We grew up in Southern New Jersey together. We actually were in the same high school band together. We were pretty cool. I was the sax player, but probably least musical of the entire group. Dan was the bass player. Well, let's be honest. The drummer obviously was the least musical of the group. So I was the second least. Yeah, we also played youth sports together, kept in touch throughout the years. I have Dan Haller. Dan, say hi to everybody. Where are you video chatting us from?
Hey, I am video chatting you from my home in Brooklyn, New York. Yeah, been working from home for a few weeks now in our apartment. So climbing up the walls a little bit, but definitely plenty of math to keep me busy.
Now, New York City, everybody's hearing about New York City being like the epicenter of growth of the virus. How's it feel over there? Just to give people some perspective.
Yeah, it's honestly, I think New Yorkers in general are pretty resilient and pretty able to adapt to things pretty easily. I think it was pretty hectic for the first few weeks. People were really scared, and you just hear really kind of terrifying numbers in the daily briefings every day, and just it seemed like things were just escalating out of control. But I'd say over the last 2 weeks or so, a week and a half maybe, when things have evened out a little bit and people just kind of have gotten used to the way that things are working now, people are taking it a little bit more in stride, and you plan things differently and you see things differently. So I think, we're doing all right. I think at this point, just vigilance and fighting the lack of access to things that you normally would have. It's starting to get nice out. Yeah. People won't be walking around more, and it's just not as possible. Right. I should also mention that my wife is pregnant. She's 8.5 months pregnant right now, so that's kind of an extra layer of anxiety and
uncertainty for sure.
And uncertainty, but we're hanging in there. I think things are turning around a little bit, so I'm psyched about that.
You guys going to a hospital? I just read an article how sometimes people are doing it at home now, more often at least.
Yeah, we're still planning on going to the hospital. We briefly talked about that kind of when things first start to get really bad, and especially when there were a few days there when they were not allowing anybody to accompany the pregnant woman into the hospital with them. So that was really scary. Kind of the idea of sending my wife into the hospital by herself to have her kid. It's our first kid, and it's already anxious enough. But luckily that is not the case anymore, and I'll be able to be there with her and everything. So
good to hear. Yeah. Well, let's get to it. Dan, who do you work for and what do you do?
Yeah, sure. So I work for an advertising agency called Heartbeat. It specializes in servicing healthcare clients, so primarily pharmaceutical companies, but also medical device companies and healthcare institutions like hospitals and insurance companies and things like that. And specifically, I lead the media department in Heartbeat, which media, for those that don't know, the media function in an advertising agency. Sometimes it's called media planning and buying, but it's basically figuring out where the ads are going to run and negotiating and purchasing the ad space that they're going to run it.
Awesome. Now tell me, how'd you get to this job? It's a pretty cool job. So where'd you go to college, and what other jobs did you have leading up to this gig?
Sure. I think I've had maybe a little bit of a different route than a lot of people.
Yep. And we want to hear that route.
Yeah. So I went to college at NYU. I studied philosophy and music. Like you said, we played music together in high school. That was always a big interest of mine. I really didn't know what I wanted to get into at that point. I thought, maybe I would get into law, maybe I would be a teacher. I really didn't know. So I just kind of studied things that were interesting to me and I kind of had a proclivity for, and, philosophy and music were definitely those things. Not really thinking, where is it going to lead me in the professional world. After college, I tried to kind of make a living as a musician for a while. I did that for about 5 years, kind of just scrapping by, but never really broke through. Played a lot of, very fun, had a lot of fun experiences, played a lot of great music, did a lot of great things, but, never really made a living out of it. So, at a certain point, I just said to myself, kind of like, I need to figure something else out. I need to give something else a try.
Okay.
And
so you're about like 26, 27 now?
I think I was 25 when
Okay.
I basically said, let's try something else out. And I got my real
Well,
estate.
hold on a second. Kids in the background. What is going on, guys? Okay. Wally, let your sister poop. Let your sister poop, Wally. Sorry, I told you I was putting the kids down for a nap. That failed. And Lola's pooping, and Wally just barged into the bathroom on that. That was great. Okay, so you're about 25. Sorry.
Yeah, so about 25, decided, I need to do something else. So I got my real estate license, and I started, I spent about a year as a real estate agent in doing apartment rentals in Manhattan, which was a really interesting job. Ultimately, not really one for me. I remember that.
We're good.
I remember when I first started, I got a packet of training materials from my boss, and one of them was an article from the Times that said like the 5 types of real estate agents. And so I started reading through it, and one of them was like the genuinely nice person. I was like, I'm a nice guy. Like, let's see how I can take advantage of this and, be be successful in that way. And the first sentence was, you're probably not going to make a lot of money in real estate. So that kind of stuff was telling. It was just incredibly hard, just a grind all the time. And it's a sales job, so it's commission based, and it just.
Yeah.
And so I was looking to get out of that, and I connected with a guy kind of through my personal network, a friend of my brother's who he had gone to college with, who was looking at this agency and running the media department at the time. And, he had a need for people, entry-level jobs. He had just had to let somebody go and somebody else quit right at the same time. So I started talking to him about, what I was doing in real estate. And, a lot of the job that I was doing in real estate was writing and posting ads for apartments and then kind of sifting through the leads that I got and trying to act on them. So a lot of parallels in terms of what I did there and, some of the functions in advertising. So he hired me as an entry-level associate media planner is the title. And then, over the last 10 years, I've worked my way up in the department, and I run the department now.
That's awesome, man. So you went from like music and not doing much math, maybe some figuring out rent prices and stuff, to like now apparently you're doing a lot of math. Tell me about the math you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I will say, and this, there is a lot of math involved in music as well. So
very much so.
Signatures and anything that relates to rhythms is going to have a mathematic element to it. So, I think that you can be very creative with math, even outside of the traditional math space. But probably not a ton of math in real estate, aside from trying to figure out what my commission would be if I was able to rent an apartment. Right. But in media, we use math every day, quite a bit of the day. So the main kind of things that we do in media first, research. So try to understand the target audience that we're trying to engage with an advertising campaign, and that means looking through research and trying to interpret different reach percentages or indices that describe an audience and how they relate to kind of the average person. We're always looking for what's different about this target audience. So that's kind of a lot of data review and data analysis. We use math a lot in the planning phase. So when we're trying to figure out either what is the questions that we get from our clients, how much money should I spend on this campaign? Within this budget, how much should we allocate to television versus print versus digital, things like that. We have some software that we've developed that helps us using syndicated research and using kind of market average costs. We can project out what different investments in different media channels are going to create in terms of impact against a client's objective. So we can project, for every $1 million invested from 0 to $100 million in a TV campaign, what is the likely awareness of a product going to be driven with that investment? And we do that across every channel that we might be investing in to come up with an optimized media mix. So, helping a client get the most out of their budget. So it's involved in the research, it's involved in the planning. Obviously, buying media is all about negotiating costs. And so a lot of times you're trying to figure out, you want a goal for yourself when you enter into a negotiation. You want to say, based on what I know to be the average response rate for an ad unit like this, what do I need to get the cost to so that it makes sense from a financial perspective to actually purchase that. So you're doing simultaneously a lot of kind of goal seeking in terms of finding that ideal cost for a placement, but also projecting campaign performance. Because whenever we put together a media plan, we tell our clients, hey, you're going to give us $50 million for this media plan. That is going to produce, this many actions on your website, and that's going to translate to this many sales, and that, we're doing a lot of math, and we're putting together the projections for the campaign. But then the real thing is we put a campaign into market, and particularly for digital placements, banner ads, emails, social posts, content distribution, things like that. We get a huge amount of data back on how those placements are performing. So we have these kind of constant data feeds that are coming towards us that we're on a daily basis trying to interpret so that we can go about what we call optimizing media plan. So, much like if you have a portfolio of financial investments, you want to move money from those that are underperforming into those that are overperforming. We kind of approach a media plan in the same way. If you have all of these advertising spots, you interpret the data and you figure out which ones, through that data analysis, which ones are performing well, which ones are not performing well, and you reallocate money in the media plan accordingly to get the best out of it.
So through that, it sounds like you're using a lot of statistics, talking about seeing where this ad can reach to. No, thanks, I'm good. Lots of statistics. You're doing a lot of just business analysis. Where'd you learn all this stuff, Danny? You are a philosophy and a music major. We went to the same high school together. I didn't learn about any of that stuff. How are you all of a sudden this huge statistics guy and huge business analyst?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I learned pretty much all of it doing the job. I started as an entry-level person. I really had no, I did a little bit of advertising just on my own for the real estate job. And, I was always in bands, and we were always trying to get people to come to shows and stuff like that. So I did a little Facebook advertising and things like that, but I really had no idea what I was doing. And then I showed up at the agency on the first day, and basically I was just handed a pile of contracts, and they said, make sure there's an out clause in each one of these, and make sure that the price is what we agreed to, and then sign the contracts and send them back. And so that kind of gave me an intro into how these contracts are structured and how media is bought and sold and negotiated. And then, I really I started, as I got exposed to different aspects of the media process, I started building up these kind of very specific media related math skill sets. And I think a lot of it might seem very specific, but I'm not a statistician. I would never claim to be a statistician, but I can understand when people who are statisticians are talking about things like statistical significance and probability and things like that. So I think a lot of it is just kind of like building or relying on the core basics of mathematic principles that a lot of times are what we learn in grammar school through high school. I took calculus in high school, but I don't think I use calculus too much.
Probably not. Probably not.
But I use, I always try to tell my team like to try to practice their mental math skills, because that helps a lot in negotiation. If you can just kind of like throw numbers back and forth, and even if you're not 100% accurate, when you're trying to estimate, what would a 15% rate reduction be on this ad placement? If you can kind of just in the moment be in the right ballpark in your head, that just prepares you a lot more for interpreting data. But a lot of it is just knowing who really is specialized in these more specific tasks. So we have a strategy team. They're really the ones that are conducting primary research and then pulling together insights out of that primary research, whether it's qualitative or quantitative. There's really two types of research in advertising. Quantitative research is really, collecting data points on a target audience that can then be translated to insights. So we don't do that work, but then we look at the result of that and interpret it, right? So I don't need to be a statistician in order to do the statistical analysis. I just need to be able to understand enough of the concepts of statistics in order to know what to do with the statistical analysis once it's done.
Now, throughout like high school and whatever classes you took in college, did you feel like you were quantitatively strong? Like you had a smart, math brain, and you could kind of fall back on this stuff? Fall back on your understandings on this?
I think so. Yeah, I think I've always had a little bit of a soft place in my heart for math. I think the more basic stuff when we were learning it in grammar school and middle school and, even some of high school, I think it came pretty naturally to me. I do think I have kind of an analytical mind. Even when I was studying philosophy, one of my very favorite philosophy classes was logic, which is essentially, you use different symbols. You're not using numbers, but it's very similar to, balancing equations, basically, in the world of math. That's kind of like the math of philosophy. And I really, really got into that when that was part of my philosophy curriculum. But yeah, I think media to me ultimately is a really great balance of left brain and right brain. You have to be very creative, but you also need to be able to really make sense of data and apply kind of basic math skills very fluidly when you do the job. So I think for someone like me and my background, it came really naturally to me, and I really enjoyed it. I do.
Now, you are a good example of, you don't have to know what you're doing when you go to college, and you could have a certain major and it could completely change. Like your profession could completely change. You end up learning a lot of math in the future. Hold on a second. Sorry. The kids should be napping right now. So you don't exactly need to know what you want to do with your life. You end up falling back on a lot of mental math. A lot of students are like, I never have to do math without a calculator, but you end up having to do math. And then I'm losing my train of thought because my kids are going crazy.
Yeah, I think the point is probably like you never know kind of what road you're going to take in life, and you never know what what skills you're going to have to rely on once you actually get to something that you end up doing or enjoying or having exposure to. So I think what beyond just math and beyond any particular skill set or topic or anything like that, I think one of the very most traits of a successful person, at least in my area, is curiosity. And just whether that's exploring concepts that you don't know, whether how exactly you're going to apply to what you're doing, or really going deep on the subject matter that you actually are going to be responsible for. Having this kind of curiosity for learning more and understanding things, I think has, when I look at the most successful people in my agency and in my professional life, they all have this kind of undying curiosity and need to understand, need to know more. And you really do, you never know when two things are going to get connected in your mind, and you'll all of a sudden have a use for something that you didn't know you would, right? So I work in healthcare, I work in pharmaceutical advertising primarily. It's a highly regulated industry, so we have to abide by a lot of federal regulations and how we're able to talk about our products, how we're able to target consumers with advertising. There's this regulation called HIPAA. That means that I can't take your protected healthcare data and turn that into targeting you in a one-to-one basis based on knowing that protected information. So traditionally, pharma advertising has been very stodgy, like it doesn't change a lot. There's this kind of playbook of things that you just do. This is how you launch a brand. This is how you create awareness, and a lot of it relies on spending hundreds of millions of dollars on television campaigns. But my agency, we like to call ourselves the agency for challenger brands. And because of that, we're always looking for kind of, what is a better way, a more efficient way, a more productive way of engaging an audience or moving them to a certain behavioral shift that maybe others are not thinking of. So we try to pull in concepts from even other industries, travel or entertainment or, hospitality. We try to look at what other people are doing and think about how can we pull in elements of this to service our healthcare clients, even though there's no direct correlation. So there are tons of examples of things that we've done that had never been done in the healthcare industry before, but we saw elements of that working well in another vertical, and we could pull it in and make it work in our regulated environment. Which again, it goes back to just having that unending curiosity and just taking it in as much as possible, filling your brain up with as much as possible that's interesting to you, and then you'll figure out where there's an application for it whenever that time comes. Or in the meantime, if you don't, you still learn something really interesting, and that'll make you more interesting.
Mental curiosity, not being afraid of new things, always trying new things, experimenting, being open to things. Things every single student should hear are necessary. I think right now with distance learning, there's some students who are just shutting down. They're like, I can't learn this way. It's like, well, this is a good challenge for everybody. This is a time to see, are you capable of adjusting and adapting yourself to new circumstances? Yeah. So, well, Danny, go back to your senior year of high school, and if you could give yourself one piece of advice, whether it's like about what school you're attending or just like in general or math specific, what would you give yourself, and like what would you tell a second semester senior right now if you could say one thing?
This is going to sound so corny, but I think just like make the most of it. I think that I got very caught up in like getting into a particular college, and I did not end up getting into that college. And I think that it messed me up a little bit because I had it in my mindset like this was the only acceptable option, right? And anything else is not going to be, is just going to be less than just by the fact that it's not where I wanted to go, the one place I wanted to go. But ultimately, there are so many options out there, and especially given the way that my career has turned out, you never really know what road you're going to go down. I mean, some people have a really strong understanding of what they want to do from a really young age. But I think a lot of people, if they're really honest with themselves, they have lots of interests, but that those interests and those the passion that they have can be applied in a lot of different ways. So I think the most important thing is like, think about what you're really passionate about, and then be open to exploring that passion in any way that kind of presents itself to you. Because yeah, it doesn't need to, you don't need to travel down this very specific, preconceived path in order to be successful. You can, the most important thing is that you're passionate about what you're doing. I don't see a lot of people that are successful that are not passionate. But as long as you keep that fire, you keep that passion going, then, the world will reveal all sorts of different potential options for you. And, when you're 17 years old, it feels like you've done a lot and gone through a lot, and you definitely have at that point. But, I'm 36 years old right now, which means that I've lived more of my life after the age of 17 than before the age of 17.
Good math, Danny. That's good math.
And things are so much different than the way that I thought they would be, but in the best ways possible. So be open, be passionate, and don't get, if things don't go exactly the way that you thought that they would, don't get too hung up on that, because you never know what's right around the corner.
One extra thing I want to add in, and I think you're a good example of it, and I think other people could have talked about it, but nobody's really said it specifically, is that, like, keep in touch with your friends, keep your networks open. You got a job kind of through a friend just that you met, and, kind of being social and being open to being social, I think, is important. And when you become a professional, the concept of networking is really huge. It's like, you got to keep your network open. You got to keep your LinkedIn kind of updated and stuff like that. And I don't think kids realize that. It's like, make as many friends as you can and keep in touch with them, because you never know where they can help you out in the future.
Totally. Yeah. You never know who's going to connect you to who, and that openness to different experiences, to different pathways, like openness to different people and different points of view. I think it's so important to not get stuck in the mindset of there's one way to do this, or there's one right answer to this problem. Creativity can be applied in any environment, any problem. And a lot of times the problems that we're solving are interpersonal ones, right? So having a good emotional intelligence and having a good ability to connect with people is something that is a great complement to having good math skills, first of all. And really, again, is something that the most successful people are really good with, connecting with other people. And that's, emotionally, communication skills are probably one of the most important things possible. I think there's probably a lot of people that are really good at math, but are not able to talk about what they're thinking about well enough, right? So that's almost as important as getting the right answer to the math problem, is telling somebody, this is why this is important, or this is why you should care about the work that I've done, on this. So it's I feel like I'm a bad networker, to be honest with you, because I don't spend a lot of time really focusing on that. But I think I'm lucky in that my job exposes me to a lot of people all the time. I'm constantly pitching new business, which means I'm meeting with prospective clients all the time as part of my job. Media buying means that you're meeting with media sellers constantly, which means you're getting exposed to not only different pieces of the marketplace, but also different people, the salespeople that are pitching these products. They're often great collaborators because they're selling something, you're buying something. There's this kind of mutual incentive to work together. So, I've got like 1,100 contacts on LinkedIn. I don't think I've really done a lot of work to gather them. I've just been working in advertising for 10 years, and I've talked to a lot of people.
There's a lot of people in advertising, that's for sure. Yeah. Well, Mr. Mental Creativity, Professional Creativity, Mr. Creativity, Dan Haller. Thank you so much for coming on Mr. Messner's Math in the Real World Speaker Series. If anybody has any questions for Dan, pass along to me, and I'll be sure to give it to him. Thank you very much, Danny.
Yeah, thank you, Robbie. Mr.